Welcome to my talk on communication in the context of neurodevelopmental diversity. This is a three-part talk. Welcome to part one. My name is Celina Cerf, and I will begin by giving you some of my background. My career started as a speech and language pathologist, or an SLP, commonly referred to as a speech therapist, at the University of Michigan Medical Center. I am now in my third year of a neurodevelopmental fellowship, which is a subspecialty in child neurology, and I am currently at the Kennedy Krieger Institute. I will also be joining the research endeavors of Dr. Natasha Ludwig, and with a focus on the ASXL community. The objective for part one is to share knowledge of the features of communication. Then in part two, we will review ways that communication can break down, and then we will discuss ways to support play and communication stages in part three. First, I want to start by empowering you. You know your child best. Healthcare providers are collaborative members of your team, and their intention should be to give you the tools to promote healthy growth and learning. There are many different approaches to language acquisition, and sometimes it takes time to find a provider that works well with your family or cultural values. And also, in the end, home programming is essential. So what is learned in the therapy sessions hopefully is also taught to you to be able to be practiced at home. Let's talk about the components of communication. One component that is often not thought about is play, and this is very important for learning back and forth reciprocal interaction. Next is language, which includes verbal and nonverbal forms of language. Types of language areas are expressive, receptive, and pragmatic language, which I will define soon. Other areas of communication are articulation, literacy, and fluency. We won't be discussing literacy and fluency in this talk, but let's start talking about language. The basic principle of language is using symbols to communicate. These symbols can be characterized by verbal words, pictures, and gestures. Expressive language is the use of verbal and nonverbal symbols to communicate. Receptive language is what is understood. Pragmatic language involves social communication, which I will explain more soon. There are many different modalities of communication: verbal, sign language, and another area called alternative augmentative communication, or AAC. Speech-language pathologists, or SLPs, are specially trained to help your child navigate which AAC device might be the most appropriate for them. Oftentimes, kids start with a picture exchange communication method, which is where a picture is used to communicate an idea, such as the picture of a toilet, to be used to communicate, "I need to go to the bathroom." Another way of practice is total communication, which is using multiple modalities. Ultimately, whichever method is used, it's helpful to use the same method across settings, meaning at school and at home, just to ensure effective communicating. Let's talk for a moment about pragmatic language. This is social communication. So this is the combination of potentially spoken or nonverbal and verbal communication, looking at our social interactions, social cognition, combining it all together, all those pieces of subtext to use language functionally with different people across different settings. Articulation involves the patterns of motor movements used to make speech sounds. These speech sounds are often acquired in the corresponding level of difficulty for these motor movements. For example, there's a speech pattern called a bilabial, which is sounds that are made with the lips, such as m, b, and p. These sounds are often easier to make and tend to emerge first. There are also other sounds such as alveolar, which is where the tongue goes to the alveolar ridge on the hard palate or the roof of the mouth, such as with n and d and t. Other sounds include fricatives, which is teeth to the lips, and velar sound, which involves your tongue moving to the back of your mouth for the k and g sounds. I think it's helpful to conceptualize that speech sounds are acquired according to these difficult or easier or more difficult speech patterns so that we can help scaffold the skills and the sounds that we're teaching. But again, your speech therapist or SLP can help guide the speech sound acquisition process. Briefly, I'd like to mention the types of communication disorders that are often associated with difficulties in communication. So one type of diagnosis is expressive language disorder, which is where you have an ease of understanding but difficulty expressing. Another is mixed expressive receptive language disorder, which is where both expressing and understanding are delayed compared to peers. Then there's apraxia of speech and dysarthria, which we're going to take a moment to focus solely on those two and differentiating them. And then also social pragmatic language disorder versus autism spectrum disorder, which we will also take a moment to talk about. So for autism and social pragmatic language disorder, the main differentiating factor is if your child has repetitive behaviors or restricted interests. So autism is characterized by having both social skill deficits or pragmatic skill deficits, as well as those restricted interest or repetitive behaviors. If restricted interests and repetitive behaviors are not a feature, then that's when the findings or features are most consistent with a social pragmatic language disorder. Let's take a moment to think about apraxia versus dysarthria. Apraxia is a disorder of motor speech programming characterized by errors in articulation, whereas dysarthria is characterized by a speech disorder where you have impaired innervation of speech musculature, leading to decreased strength of this musculature. With dysarthria, errors are generally distorted, such as with slurring, whereas with apraxia, you have impaired precision and consistency of motor movements. This leads to inconsistent errors with consonants, vowels, and even voicing. So sometimes you might hear some sounds made very well, and then in other contexts not at all, just because of that motor programming difficulty. With apraxia, you don't often see involuntary motor control difficulties, such as with chewing or swallowing, whereas dysarthria often also have difficulty with motor chewing or swallowing, and there are exceptions to this. For verbal apraxia, well-rehearsed or automatic speech is often easiest to produce, such as this on-demand speech might be more difficult. Whereas dysarthria, there's really no difference in how easily speech is produced on the situation. It's the same type of distortion throughout. These are some excellent questions that I have received from parents in the past. One of which is, when do I seek an autism evaluation if my child already has diagnoses that pertain to language or speech? And my response is, if you have concerns about social skills, it can be very helpful to seek an evaluation. Often your primary care provider can help guide you to who can provide the evaluation. Professionals who are often involved with autism evaluations include speech and language pathologists or SLPs, neuropsychologists. Medical providers can include psychiatrists, developmental behavioral pediatricians, as well as neurodevelopmental neurologists. And can you have more than one speech and language diagnosis? And yes, you absolutely can. Every child is different, every presentation is different, and certain diagnoses can be hard to differentiate, including apraxia and dysarthria. In the end, what's important is to land on diagnoses that best inform a therapy plan or program that helps your child communicate. So with that, we will end part 1, and I look forward to seeing you all in part 2.